All right. So, we've been getting into some seriously heavy stuff lately.
Right, absolutely.
Like head-spinning stuff. It's like, how do we actually know anything for sure?
It is a bit like trying to read the instruction manual to your own brain, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating stuff. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into.
Let's do it.
In this deep dive, you've sent us some sources that are all about pure reason. That knowledge that, well, we have even before we actually experience anything.
Right.
It's like, how is our understanding even built? Like, what are those foundational principles that shape how we look at the world and make sense of it all?
That's a great way to put it.
Our mission today, I think it's to give a clear overview of this big, complex exploration
I think so too.
of pure reason, to try to, distill the core ideas and the structure of this whole quest to understand how our minds actually work.
Right. And I think it's so relevant to everybody, right? I mean, have you ever just thought about something that you just know is true? Like, okay, one apple plus another apple equals two apples.
Yeah.
Right? Or that feeling that everything happens for a reason.
Exactly.
Like there's got to be some cause, right?
Yes.
These sources dig into those bedrock principles. So I think that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first big idea is this concept of a priori cognition.
Right.
Now, what are we even talking about here? It's kind of a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit. A priori cognition, but think of it like the inherent rules of a game
Okay.
before you even start playing.
Okay.
All right, you kind of know what the rules are going in.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about here, a priori knowledge. That knowledge that doesn't come from experience. It's necessary.
It just has to be true.
Right. It must be true. And it's universal. It applies to everything, always. And the text gives us some really great examples here, like mathematical truths.
Okay. Yeah.
7 plus 5 equals 12.
Hmm.
We don't have to conduct experiments to figure that out, do we?
No, we don't.
Right. Our reason, we just grasp it
Yeah.
directly. Another good example, that principle of every change must have a cause.
Oh, yeah. Okay. No, that's a big one. Cause and effect. That feels so deeply fundamental. And actually, the text brings up the philosopher Hume in this context. Why is that?
Okay, so this is really interesting because it kind of goes against what David Hume had to say about causality.
Okay.
So Hume's idea was that we get this idea of cause and effect just from seeing things happen over and over again.
Okay, if I drop this pen, it's going to fall. It's going to fall every time.
Exactly. Like we develop this habit of associating, one event with another. But the text we're looking at, it takes a totally different approach. It says, no. The concept of a cause includes the idea of a necessary link to its effect.
Okay.
Right? Like a universal rule. If it were just a matter of habit, like Hume said, that sense of, must be, that, the effect must follow the cause, that wouldn't be there. It would just be a psychological quirk,
So it's not just that we've seen things, fall to the ground countless times, but there's this inherent understanding that there's a reason.
Precisely.
Gravity. It's not, we don't even need to know that it's called gravity, but we understand that there's something making it fall.
Yeah, yeah. And the text even takes it further. It suggests that these a priori principles, like causality,
Right.
they might be essential for us to even have experiences,
Well,
coherent experiences.
No. Okay.
Think about it.
That's a big claim.
How could we make sense of the world with all this constant, bombardment of sensations if we didn't have some way of organizing it all, of understanding that these are events, that there are causes and effects?
Yeah, that's like saying that our minds come preloaded with certain software, right?
It is a bit like that, yeah.
To make sense of how the universe works.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us back to the mission of our deep dive, right?
It does, yeah.
Because if we can grasp these a priori principles, it's we're understanding the most fundamental level of how we understand.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what makes this so important.
It's huge.
Understanding the nature and the extent of a priori knowledge. It's a really fundamental, a shortcut to understanding how our minds work.
Oh.
Okay. But the text doesn't stop there. It says, hey, this a priori basis, it's not just for big principles, like causality. It's also for some of our most basic concepts. What do you think about that part of the discussion?
Well, the example that really grabbed me was the ones about body and substance.
Oh, yeah, those are good.
It's even if you strip away all the sensory characteristics of of a body, like the color, texture, the temperature, you still can't imagine it without space.
Right.
Like it has to occupy space.
It's
As a double.
isn't it?
Yeah.
We just can't get rid of that concept of space.
Right.
When we think about a physical object, even in our minds, it's like space has an a priori origin, right?
Right.
Like a necessary framework for how we think about anything physical at all.
Okay.
And then, similar with the concept of substance.
Right.
When we think about any object, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's like a real thing you can touch or something abstract.
Right.
We still have this idea of something that's like underneath the qualities, something that's permanent.
It's like the thing that's holding it all together.
Exactly.
Right. Even if our senses don't see it.
Yeah. Some core entity.
And the text really emphasizes how necessary that concept is.
Yeah. That's a big clue, isn't it? That it's not from experience. This feeling that substance just has to be there.
Right.
It's a priori. It's fundamental to how our understanding just structures the world.
Okay.
Now, from there, the text moves on to, well, both the power and the limits of this a priori knowledge.
Yeah.
It uses mathematics as a kind of main example.
Right. Math is like the poster child for a priori reasoning, isn't it? Like we can build these huge complex systems just by thinking,
Yeah.
seemingly totally separate from the real world. But then the text throws in Plato's dove.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's an analogy that really makes you stop and think.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
That dove feeling the air resistance, as it's flying.
Yeah.
You might think, oh, if there was no air, I could fly even faster.
Right.
I could be totally free. That's kind of like Plato's idea of philosophers.
Okay.
Right? Going beyond the world of the senses.
Right.
Thinking that, pure intellect, no pesky real world stuff to get in the way.
Yeah.
That is how you reach the highest knowledge.
But the key takeaway is that, without the air, without that resistance, the dove has nothing to push against.
Exactly.
It can't fly.
Yeah.
So it's this beautiful analogy of how our intellect needs that messy real world to actually make progress.
It needs that grounding.
Right.
Otherwise, we're just floating around these abstract ideas
Right.
that don't actually connect to anything.
Building castles in the sky.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And this brings us to a really important distinction between two types of a priori knowledge: analytical and synthetical a priori judgments.
Right.
Now, this is where it gets a little more intricate, right?
Yeah.
A bit more technical. So, as I understand it, a lot of what our reason does is just kind of analyzing concepts we already have.
Yeah.
Like breaking them down, seeing how they fit together.
Clarifying.
Yeah. And that can give us new insights, of course.
Right.
But it doesn't actually add any new content to our understanding.
Right. It's like you're not adding a new piece to the puzzle, are you?
No.
You're kind of rearranging the pieces you already have.
Yeah.
You're figuring out what's already there.
Unlocking a secret that was hidden in the box but already there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Analytical judgments. They're like they're like explanations of what's already contained in a concept. It might be implicit, but it's there.
Okay.
So they bring clarity.
Right.
They reveal connections.
Yeah.
But they're not bringing in like brand new information.
Okay, so that's analytical. But then the text says, well, sometimes reason goes beyond that to make what are called synthetical a priori judgments.
Right. Right.
Now, what's the key difference there?
So in a synthetical judgment, you're basically connecting two concepts,
Okay.
where that second concept isn't already contained in the first one.
Okay.
And the a priori part, well, that means we're making that connection not based on experience, but on reason itself.
Right.
The example that keeps coming up is everything that happens has a cause.
Yeah, it's back.
Right. Because the concept of cause, that's not already tucked away inside the concept of something happening. They're different ideas. So when we say, look, everything that happens must have a cause, we're making a synthetic judgment.
Okay.
And the fact that we hold that to be true universally and necessarily, that points to it being a priori.
Okay, so it's a priori, it's synthetic. So the big question is, what's making that connection? Where's that certainty coming from? Like, what's the glue?
Right. The text asks, what is the secret sauce here?
Yeah.
What is that unknown X that lets us connect these separate concepts with such confidence, a confidence that goes beyond any single experience?
Right. And experience itself can't be that foundation.
Right.
Because any one experience is limited
Right.
and specific. It can't give us the universal and necessary truth that we feel when we talk about causality.
Exactly. And here's the thing, it's these synthetic a priori propositions that underpin our speculative a priori knowledge.
Right.
Do the judgments that really expand our understanding.
Beyond just analyzing what we already had.
Exactly. And that leads us to the heart of the text, really.
Yeah.
The idea of a critique of pure reason. Now, what's the point of this new kind of a philosophical approach?
Okay. So the critique of pure reason, it's not about like building a new system of knowledge, is it?
Not directly, no.
It's more like it's taking a step back,
Right.
critically examining pure reason itself
Yeah, exactly.
to understand what it can and can't do.
Like testing the tools.
Yeah.
Before we go off and build something.
It's like quality control for our brains.
Exactly. It's not a doctrine, it's an evaluation.
Yeah.
And the main aim, at least when it comes to speculation, it's kind of negative. It's not about expanding the boundaries of reason forever.
Right.
It's about purifying it, identifying its natural limit.
Making sure it doesn't go off the rails.
Yeah, to shield it from error.
Right. Okay.
And just doing that, figuring out where pure reason can and can't go.
Right.
That's a huge step forward, according to the text.
It's setting the boundaries.
Yep. It is, yeah.
And that's where this term transcendental comes into play. Now, what does that mean in this context? It's one of those words, right?
It is, yeah. It can be a tricky one. I like to think of it as focusing on the lens, the lens through which we see the world, rather than the world itself.
Okay, so it's not about the objects, it's about how we know them, and especially that a priori part of how we know them.
Exactly.
Okay.
So transcendental refers to knowledge that isn't so much about objects themselves, but about how we come to know them. Specifically, the a priori conditions that make experience possible in the first place.
Okay.
Like what are the fundamental ways in which our minds are structured?
Yeah.
Do you even have experiences of objects?
Yeah.
That's the transcendental question. And the idea is that a system of such a priori conceptions, a really complete system,
Right.
that would be a transcendental philosophy.
Okay.
But the text says, hold on, this current work, this critique, this is more focused. It's a transcendental critique. Yeah. It's like a preparatory stage.
Right.
Okay. It's a touchstone for figuring out whether all this a priori knowledge is actually valid.
Right.
It's setting the stage for a potential organon. That's a fancy word for system, a system of pure reason.
Right. So it's like a blueprint for how we might build that system.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And importantly, the scope is limited.
Okay.
It's not trying to figure out everything about, the universe and external objects.
Right, right. It's about us.
It's about the mind.
Yeah.
And it's a priori abilities.
Okay, that makes sense. So this is an inward exploration, right? It's about understanding the cognitive landscape of our own minds as the foundation of knowledge. Okay, so then the text outlines how this new science, so to speak, would be structured.
Right.
Dividing it into a doctrine of the elements and a doctrine of the method. Can you break down that distinction for us?
Yeah. Okay, so think of the doctrine of the elements, like identifying the fundamental building blocks of our a priori knowledge.
Okay.
The basic ingredients.
Raw material.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then the doctrine of the method.
Right.
Well, that's about the correct application.
Yeah.
How do we use this knowledge the right way? What are the rules, the procedures?
Okay, so elements are like what we've got.
Yeah.
And methods are how we use them.
Exactly.
Got it.
And the text also makes this really crucial point. It says there are two sources of human knowledge.
Okay.
Our senses,
Okay.
through which, objects are given to us.
Right.
And then our understanding.
So senses give us the data.
Yeah.
And understanding processes it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And importantly, even our sensory experience might have these a priori elements in it
Okay.
that shape how we actually receive information.
Interesting.
And these belong to transcendental philosophy. So this brings us to the transcendental aesthetic, which is the first part of the doctrine of elements.
Yeah.
What's the main focus there?
Okay. So the transcendental aesthetic, as I get it, it's all about our capacity for sensation. And it makes this really interesting claim that space and time, they're not properties of things out there in the world. They're not even relationships between things.
Right.
They are pure forms of our intuition.
Right.
They're subjective and a priori. They're like the fundamental frameworks of our minds.
Exactly. So space and time, they're not like independent realities
Right.
or connections between things.
Right.
They are how we experience anything at all. The text uses this amazing idea that if we were to like remove the subject,
Us, the perceivers.
yeah, or even just change the way our senses work, right?
Right.
Then space and time themselves would disappear.
Whoa.
They wouldn't be phenomena anymore. They depend on our perception.
Okay, so the way we experience things as being in space and time is a result of how our minds are designed to take in and organize sensory information.
Yeah, great.
But the actual sensations themselves, like feeling warm, seeing colors, hearing music, that's still a posteriori, right? That's still coming from our interactions with the world.
Exactly. Sensations are like the matter of our intuition. And they are empirical.
Right.
But space and time, those are the pure forms.
Okay.
They're the a priori contributions from our minds.
Okay, and this understanding of space as a pure a priori intuition, that helps explain how geometry can be a synthetic science that yields true statements without relying on specific experiences.
Right. It's because space itself isn't something we discover out there. It's a fundamental structure of our own intuition.
So we can make these universal statements about spatial relationships because space is already built into how we perceive things. It's not an external property we're measuring.
Yeah. And it's important to note that these judgments we make based on these pure intuitions, they're limited to the world of possible experience, the world that can be given to our senses.
Right.
We can't just go off and make claims about things that we can't possibly experience,
Yeah.
at least not based on pure intuition alone.
Okay. And the text is also careful to say that unlike space and time, there aren't other like fundamental subjective frameworks from which we can derive synthetic a priori propositions.
Right.
So space and time have this really unique status as these core forms of how we perceive the world.
Precisely.
All right. So this leads us nicely into the second major part of the doctrine of elements, which is transcendental logic. What's the scope of this section?
Okay, so transcendental logic, this is where we shift gears. From our ability to receive sensations to our ability to understand them.
Okay.
So it's about understanding and reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how our faculty of understanding, the part of us that thinks,
Right.
how it processes the information from our senses and how it forms concepts and makes judgments a priori. And the text makes this distinction between general logic,
Oh, yeah.
which is like the formal rules of thought, just in general,
Right.
abstract, no specific content, and then transcendental logic, which asks, how does our pure understanding relate to objects a priori?
Oh. Okay, so general logic is like the basic rules of the game.
Yeah,
And transcendental logic is like, how do we apply those rules to this specific game of understanding the world?
exactly.
Got it.
And within transcendental logic, there are two key parts,
Okay.
transcendental analytic
Uh-huh.
and transcendental dialectic. What do you think the difference is between those two?
Okay, well, transcendental analytic, it's called the logic of truth.
Right.
So it seems like it's about like the legitimate tools of understanding
Right.
and how they apply to experience correctly.
Yeah.
Whereas transcendental dialectic, it's like a warning system.
It is, yeah.
It's saying, hey, be careful about misapplying those tools to things that we can't actually experience.
Exactly.
So it's pointing out the traps.
Yeah, the potential
Of
pitfalls.
reason.
Right.
Okay. So within the transcendental analytic, we have these categories of the understanding. What are those exactly? They sound important.
These are like the most fundamental concepts our understanding uses.
Okay.
The text lays them out really systematically. You've got categories of quantity, like unity, plurality, totality.
Okay.
Quality, like reality, negation, limitation.
Uh-huh.
Then relation, like substance and accident, cause and effect, reciprocity. And then modality, like possibility, existence, necessity.
Okay. That's a lot.
It's a whole framework.
But these categories you're saying, they're like the essential conditions for any thought about objects.
Precisely.
Like, we can't even think about something as an object without using these concepts.
Yeah.
Okay. And the text mentions this division between mathematical categories.
Oh, wow.
Quantity, quality, and dynamical categories. Relation, modality. What's the point of making that distinction?
So I think it reflects the different ways our understanding, engages with the objects we experience.
Okay.
So the mathematical categories, they're about intuition,
Okay.
more directly. They deal with like how much of something there is,
Right.
or the nature of it, as it appears to us. The dynamical categories.
Right.
Well, they're more about existence, how things connect to each other,
Okay.
and to our understanding in time.
Right.
And it's interesting that the third category in each of those groups
Yeah.
often comes from combining the first two.
Oh, okay.
So there's a specific function of the understanding that brings them together.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Like it's building upon itself.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's this whole idea of the transcendental deduction of the categories.
Right.
That sounds like a really important piece of the argument. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So the transcendental deduction, it's basically the justification for how these a priori concepts, the categories,
Hmm.
can apply to objects of experience.
Okay.
Now, because these categories aren't derived from experience itself, right?
Yeah.
That would be an empirical deduction.
Right.
We need a transcendental deduction to explain, well, why are they valid? Why are they relevant to the world?
Okay.
The text argues that they come from the very structure of our understanding,
Okay.
and that they are the conditions that make experience itself possible.
Whoa.
So that's the transcendental deduction. And it's important to note, these categories they're meaningless on their own, without an object.
Okay.
They're the forms of thought that we use to structure our sensory information.
Right.
They're not independent pieces of knowledge floating out there.
They need something to work on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so they're like the operating system, but they need the data.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Okay. And this then leads us to the system of all principles of the pure understanding.
Right.
Where did these principles come from?
So these principles, they emerge from applying the categories to our sensibility,
Okay.
to how we experience the world through space and time.
Okay.
They're like the fundamental rules for how our understanding connects to and makes sense of the world we perceive.
Right.
And the text outlines, 4 classes of these principles.
Right.
Axioms of intuition, anticipations of perception, analogies of experience, and postulates of empirical thought.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're all linked back to those categories.
Okay.
And whether they apply to, our immediate sensory experience, the mathematical ones, or the existence of objects in time, the dynamical ones.
Got it.
Now, the analogies of experience, those seem really crucial for understanding how we make sense of time, how things happen in order.
Yeah, tell me more about those.
Okay, so the analogies of experience, they're like the fundamental rules for how we connect our perceptions in time.
Okay.
They're the underlying principles for how we experience events as ordered, as interconnected.
Hmm.
And there are 3 main ones that the text highlights. The principle of permanence of substance,
Okay.
which we talked about a little before.
Right.
The principle of succession in time, according to the law of causality.
Okay.
And the principle of coexistence, according to the law of reciprocity or community.
Okay, so the first one, that's about the underlying reality that persists through change.
Right.
The stuff that stays the same even when things are changing.
Exactly. It says that in all change, there's a substance, a permanent reality underneath
Okay.
that endures. The text even connects this to, the saying, from nothing comes nothing.
Right.
It's like the ground that our experience of change stands on.
It's like the stage on which the play of time happens.
That's a great way to put it.
And then the second one, the principle of causality.
Right.
We've talked about that as a form of a priori knowledge. So how does it connect to our experience of time?
So here, the principle is that everything that happens, it has a cause.
Right.
Right. And the text says this is a necessary condition for us to experience events happening in a specific order in time.
Okay.
Because we apply that law of causality, to the flow of phenomena.
Right.
We can actually perceive an objective order. It's not just a random jumble of things happening in our heads.
Right.
There's an actual, determined sequence in the world.
So it's like cause and effect give us the arrow of time?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's how we understand that events are linked to what came before them.
Okay, and then the third analogy, that's about how things exist together in space.